Well, for the record, Rick Brattin. Just a pleasure to be here with you guys, and thank you for taking your time out to hear me out. I know it's your normal meeting, but it means a lot to allow me to come and speak to you. A little bit about myself, background. I served 6 years in the United States Marine Corps. I got into an accident, crushed my ankle, and could not continue serving. So I got out and started a construction company. That's something that my family had done since the 50s. My grandfather, that's kind of the family business, so I started doing that. I did that successfully for quite some time and was fed up with owning a business and feeling like every time I turned around, I felt like as a business owner, the government was working against me, and that's what really preempted me to run for state representative. I've never been involved in politics ever, never even knocked on a door, handed out a flyer for a candidate. I had no clue what I was doing whatsoever. But by the grace of God, I had people come alongside me that did, and allowed me to get elected to the state house. I served there for 8 years. I loved it. I truly enjoyed the process of that. While there, as one of the co-founders of the Conservative Caucus, as a Marine, I took my oath very seriously to defend and support the Constitution of the United States. And when I did that, I felt it very impressed upon me to actually learn what the Constitution said. As a young Marine, I didn't know what it really said. I swore an oath to defend it and die for it, but I didn't know what in the world I was, doing. And so I read it, and I really took in what our founders really meant, what they meant by this amazing American experiment. And that's what I tried to embody as a representative. Because as a representative, your oath and your charge, your duty as a representative and a senator, apart from your county offices, is the defender of every individual's liberty. That is your number one absolute responsibility, above the budget, above everything else, above passing laws and being at every ribbon cutting. That's your charge. And to make sure that every bill that you pass, every budget that you pass, it falls within the lines of the Constitution. And that's one thing I really tried to embody as a representative, and was happy to have done that. One thing that I realized with government, the charge of government is to carry out justice. And Cass County, as the 17th Circuit Court, they were really hurting. They were really struggling to bring up the caseloads. They were struggling to actually administer justice to people. And that was one thing that I was helped to champion as a rep, was the new judge that allowed them to actually bring on a new judge and actually get cases done for the 17th Circuit. That was one thing I really did enjoy. Another thing I really tried to spearhead as a rep was the tax reform and TIF reform. I know a lot of times people will cringe, oh my gosh, you're TIF. Well, as a county auditor, it's amazing that in my warrant, the check that I cut back that we didn't have a say in, that could be going to our roads, could be going to bridges, could be helping our sheriff's office. But instead, we had these cities that would come in and overrun and the vote on whether our tax revenue was going towards a project that goes to a developer. And that's one thing I tried to work as a representative, to bring a balance, an equal say, an equal number to a TIF commission. Things like that could help our local governments. Yeah, we could really help with economic development, but we need to make sure that our schools and our county governments are properly funded at the same time, and we're doing these things responsibly. Another thing, infrastructure. As a representative, there's a $22 billion budget. That was when I was serving with Scott, $22 billion. This year, they passed a $30 billion budget, but yet we continue to have crumbling roads. It's like, are we kidding? We're spending almost, from the time I was in the legislature to the time I got out, an extra $1 billion a year in our budget, but yet we can't use general revenue for our roads, and we continue to try to hit people up for more tax. I assure you, we have it in the budget. And that's one thing that just bringing that awareness and the ability to spend funds and not have to bring in more funds. I know things are tight. Cass County, one thing with Cass County, and when I was elected to rep, I wanted to stay away from the county political office because they had literally run the county off the rails, and they were financially broke and in a horrible state. but by actually cutting spending and really tightening the belt, the new commission and the people involved did some really good things. But guess what? The state has to do that as well. Not just because they're the big mean state. And that's what's funny too, being a state rep, Scott will tell you, and then going to the county or local, you know, it's always, oh, those dang local governments, blah, 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 blah. But then you come to the county and it's like, oh, that's the stupid state, they keep telling us what to do, when to do it. You know, but it's bringing that experience of realizing how the state has to operate and realizing how local governments have to operate. And being able to have that ability to govern properly in accordance with the Constitution, but also to where you guys can, where the county governments can operate and have the freedom to make the right decision and not be micromanaged by the state. The whole ordeal with the federal government. Guess what? Let them have all the dumb press and all this stuff. They're not doing anything. They're not passing anything. You know, they have all the press, they have all the, but it's the state that's actually doing this stuff, the real hard decisions. You know, that's what they're doing. And that's one thing that I think that we got to have the right people there. You know, if we go and we read the Republican platform, I mean, it's pretty, you know, cut and dry to what you're to support. And it is the Constitution. It's limited government, and it's cutting taxes and ensuring that we're holding the line on that sort of stuff. And protecting life, our Second Amendment. But that was one thing as a state representative. Yeah, everybody wanted to fight for the Second Amendment, but we have to realize we got to fight for all the other amendments and make sure that they're protected as well. And it's imperative to know the entire Constitution. That way you can't actually do that. And that's one thing that I try and will try to do as a state representative. This will be my 6th election. Every election I've had to literally go kill it, drag it home, knock on every door, turn over every rock, and I will do the same thing on this election to make sure that I do get elected. But I would love to have your guys' support, or at least have your ear, so I can explain to you more so why I believe that I will be able to carry the real Republican message to the State House. So I don't want to take up all your time. I actually love answering questions more than I do stand up and speaking to people. I would love to answer anything you guys have.
Well, I do have one, and I don't want to put you on the spot because you may not have the numbers and stuff behind you, but if you could just, for the rest of everybody, because I kind of already know, but what is the effect of TIFs on Cass County and the municipalities up there? What kind of money are you talking about losing?
About $2.2 million
Of tax dollars.
Of tax dollars of county revenue is what we write. You know, we get our EATs, that's what we call it. It's eating away at our you know, economic activity tax. Amazing how that the acronym works out perfect.
And that's for roughly 22 years, 23 years?
Yeah, it's for a very long amount of time. I don't know on each TIF is different. I can't speak for, but what we send on our quarterly, you know, sending, I mean, it's staggering of each city that we get to go and write that big check to.
And that money goes to?
Goes to the developer. I mean, that's what it, in essence, that's what it'll end up going to. The people still pay the tax, and the developer gets a nice big kickback, and you know, we lose out, our schools lose out, our ambulance districts, our, you know, all the taxing districts, they lose out, and they don't, with the way a tax, you know, TIF commission set up, if you don't know, you know, the city gets this huge majority, and then you get your ambulance district and your county officials, they get a little seat on there. But as for a real voting power, they're basically powerless, even though the voters, you know, voted them in to propose that tax, and the voters passed the tax, but yet they're able to circumvent that, not attacking the cities. I realize there's got to be, you know, some balance in there. So, but you'll come under a long attack for it. I did, you know, the cities, especially St. Louis and Kansas City, man, they were coming out after me for you know, sponsoring that sort of stuff with torches and pitchforks, I'll tell you that.
But, and you may not know again, but I mean, there's an extraordinary number of TIFs in Cass County.
Yeah.
I mean, many. It's not like 10 or 12, it's like,
oh, it's crazy.
50, 60.
Yeah. And the TIFs, especially in Belton, got out of control. I mean, it literally almost bankrupted the entire city. I mean, because they tiffed every inch of ground that they could possibly tiff. And it did it. And it hurt them. And then that was always my frustration. I said on local government in the House, and that was one of the most frustrating things, is I called it the Local Government Tax Increase Committee. Because that's what it was. All the local governments wanted to come increase the taxes. Now, that's fine. I was, if you want to enable, you know, the people to vote on something like that, good. But then my first question was always, well, what kind of economic development sort of stuff where you've squandered what the people have already given you away? That was always my preface to that. And if they're all, well, we're engaged in all that, sorry, you know, you should have just been a better steward with the money that the taxpayers gave you. Anyway, I kind of hard charger on that, but as a business, I don't get to go and just raise my revenue and you know, raise my prices just because things aren't going good for me.
I knew that was kind of in your wheelhouse, so.
Yeah, I'm pretty passionate about that.
And we only have one TIF in our county.
No, you guys,
So,
that's the thing, within the balance and a good coming together, you know, I think that's fine. But I'm not looking to, I don't think we need to do completely strike them from the books. You know, that's not the push. Good reform and common sense. Anybody else on any other issue?
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up the topic of adding a judge in the 17th Circuit, because, I mean, adding, now I'm not sure if you were aware of what was going on with adding Benton County to the 27th Circuit, which...
No, I love, just your guys'
I mean, right now we've got 3 counties in our circuit, and we have 1 circuit judge. And the way that spells out as far as workload and how much time that the presiding judge and circuit judge can spend in each county, there's 4 trial weeks, we call them, per month. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is considered a trial week, during which when we can have either big civil case trials before a jury or criminal cases. And right now, 2 of those trial weeks go to Henry County, 1 each to Bates and St. Clair. And then we have 4 law days a month, and 2 of them are Henry County and 1 each in Bates and St. Clair. If we add Benton County, we'll lose 1 of each probably. So right now today we had 140 cases on our law day. So each law day typically has that number. So the question is obvious, you know, where are we going to handle all these cases? But if we were to add another judge, then that would make more sense. So how much of a hassle was it to get the 17th to have an additional judge? How many years did it take?
1 year. But as you know, I was good friends with the budget chairman, and he worked, which he's now the state treasurer, Scott Fitzpatrick. But you know, went to him, explained the situation that we were in, the fact that Cass County had really built up to making sure the courtroom was ready for that judge, and making sure everything, all the steps have been put in place. But once it was presented, I mean, kind of explaining the caseload aspect and the fact that people, you know, by the Constitution, their right to speedy trial is being, you know, perverted just by not having enough judges. You know,
Yeah,
that's when we're pushing to increase law enforcement, that's the back end of it. We have to expect that if we've got more police on the beat, you're going to have more judges in seat. You know, I mean, so to speak, and that's kind of the push and the drive.
One of the cases that's set for trial next week is actually a St. Clair County case that came up to Henry County to change the venue, and that defendant filed a motion for speedy trial. And if we don't have a trial next week, then there's the potential that a judge would say, well, sorry, you didn't get a speedy trial, so that case is dismissed. Criminal, go free. Go forth and commit more crimes because you're free. So, I mean, I see that as being a huge issue for the 27th Circuit, and Henry County specifically, that in order to move cases off the dockets, in order to avoid people getting away with it completely by filing a speedy trial motion, I'm going to have a clearance sale, basically. I'm I'm gonna have to turn a lot of felonies into misdemeanors, and felonies where somebody ought to go to the penitentiary is gonna get probation instead, because the cases are gonna get backed up instead. So it's a huge concern, I think. And I don't think, well, what really irritates me about that whole proposal is the judiciary, that the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court appointed a whole bunch of judges from all over the state to this committee to study it. Didn't include any judges from this circuit, didn't include any prosecutors, didn't include any circuit clerks, juvenile officers, all these other people that are affected by it. But I think that would help if we had an additional judge. I think that factored into why there was relatively little interest in the attorneys in that job, because it's already a ridiculously tough job, and you add another county to that job, and plus the uncertainty with how long it is. People were suggesting that I go for it, but somebody really close to me suggested that they weren't really interested in potentially having another general election next year. I'm not mentioning names, but
She's blushing now.
Well, yeah, I think with a move like that, even with the constituency, people aren't going to complain knowing that, hey, if I have to go to trial, or if I, need to have, my issue heard in court, then I have to wait for 2 years to be heard. People will understand that, and I think I know there's an expectation of that need, and that's something I think that even with the voters, you explain, that situation. I don't think anybody would even bat an eye at the need and the push for something like that.
unfortunately, that commission, they can redraw the lines, but they cannot add a judge. It takes the legislature to add a judge.
Well, I think, kind of to piggyback on the judge aspect, the Supreme Court rule with the bonding issue, that's been a huge situation in our county. Our judges aren't happy about it, but, the pretrial aspect of it, they have to abide by that. But I know our sheriff is extremely disappointed of that ruling and making it to where they get out. The population, in my opinion, is not safe by the way that was ruled. I get, petty theft or whatever is no big deal and blah, 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 until it's petty theft of your vehicle, your tools in your truck, where you've got to go to work tomorrow. It's a pretty big deal with that aspect. So I think, that definitely needs to be addressed as well. And I hope this next go around the legislature really, not to put you on the spot. But I hope they do work on that, because it's a huge concern at our county. It's almost got our sheriff and our judges at odds, and it's not by any of their doing, it's by them doing what the Supreme Court, told them they had to do. So, yes, sir.
What is your position on initiative petition reform? I understand that the sheer volume of initiative petitions that the Secretary of State is working through now could make next year's ballot in Congress.
It's crazy. We have to have it. We have to have the ability to redress our grievances in the way of initiative petition. But the way that it's structured now, it's crazy. If we want to amend the United States Constitution, it takes 3/4 of the states to adopt. We need to have a high threshold of these sort of petitions making it through. A lot of these things that go through, the workers don't even tell you what you're even signing, which I will say a lot of that falls on voter apathy, and the fact that you're putting your name on something you don't even know what you're looking at. I had a guy come up to me, he heard I was a veteran, he's like, oh, this is for marijuana, man, this is great, you could just sign. I'm like, well, what am I signing here? I look at it, and it's like 5 pages of the marijuana deal that goes into the Constitution. Are you kidding me? Heck no. But how many people, hear that, and they write on it, no big deal, they write their name on it. And now it's enshrined in our Constitution. What a crazy issue we have now. So we have to have it, but we do have to have reform and raising the threshold on that, at least by, I would say, a 2/3 adoption, especially if it's a constitutional amendment. I think Scott, you were there with the puppy mill legislation. I mean, HSUS comes in and they put this ridiculousness on the ballot that's completely unenforceable and puts really good ethical dog breeders out of business statewide. You know, and here we had the ability, at least as a legislature, to step in and put a stop to it and make the reforms to still try to mimic the will of the people, but make it an enforceable law. You know, we had that ability with the statutory change, with what they do with the Constitution, and that's the new method to go after. Now it's, we're not going to mess with statute, we're just going to go right for the Constitution, and that becomes the huge problem. So, long story short, yes, we've got to address that. So,
Second part.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you as a state senator would be the grease to get the state senate to move? They have been roadblocks, you know, the House gets things going and the state senate just cannot function.
by constitutional design, they are a dysfunctional body. That is their constitutional design.
Deliberative.
Yeah, they're the deliberative body. But they are deliberately disruptive of the process to ensure that it's done right. I'm not an obstructionist. I want to make sure that what's being done is right. As the House, that's the thing with the House, man, you can file all this stuff that gets through committee, and I mean, thousands of bills pour into, 34 senators' laps. And you have to be deliberative of, and when I was a House member, I mean, the frustration there, wow, I have a good bill, man. I mean, I wrote the bill. It's got to be a good bill. But that's just not how they see it. And they definitely are very methodical on what they do. And the process of the Senate, their procedure is extremely important in the Senate. So, but no, as an obstructionist, I do everything I can to make sure good stuff is able to be done. But there's no guarantee that I can say that I can make 3 senators sit down on a 24-hour filibuster. That's I can't give that guarantee. So I can do my part to make sure that the process is working good, and to work with people to try to get good stuff done. I hope that answers your question.
Kind of along the same line. So for you personally, if you're elected, what would be your standard to decide whether or not to filibuster a bill?
Well, what I've said since I've been elected, if it's the biblical, constitutional, conservative, and for the people, and that's how that's been my filter. A lot of people may not like that, but that's who I am. That's what I've always represented, and it's got me elected, this far. But if it doesn't, it will, that's fine. I'll go home, but I'll have my head held high with that.
One of the things that's a big burden to all the counties is the past due board bills, per diem, and then the state's slow process about reimbursing those monies. So would you be one that would, even though the governor says he intends to pay all that off, would you be one that would kind of help spur that along a little bit?
Well, from the state level, I was in the vice chair of the corrections committee. That was one thing that we always tried to find a solution to that. It was always one of those things that always took the back burner. But especially after going to the county level and seeing just how much money that they owe and how much, I think it's, 34 million across the state is what they owe.
Around 36 million.
36 million, 34, something like that. But when you're talking the county budget, that's a lot of money that you owe. So this is a debt that you owe, and I think it's imperative that they pay, because we're providing a service and you're not paying that person for that service, and I think that's completely wrong. Just because it's another form of government doesn't make it right. So I'll do everything I can, especially being on the receiving end of not getting those funds, for sure. Anybody else?
Okay. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.